Good day, geographers, and welcome to our next lesson in our geography lecture series. My name is Donovan Rattray, your lecturer. Today we'll be looking at natural hazards and disasters in the Caribbean. Now, just a point of reference. Now, very often, people tend to make the mistake of thinking that natural hazards and natural disasters are one in the same. They are not. They are two different terminologies or phenomena that we need to differentiate. So in this case, natural hazards are basically unpredictable threats arising within the physical, biotic, and climatic environment. Note those three categories: physical, biotic, and climatic. We'll delve into those three later. However, natural hazards are basically threats out there in the environment. They may or may not happen, but when they do occur and cause any form of damages, including loss of lives or even damages to property, then it becomes a disaster. So that is the difference between a hazard and disaster. Hazard is basically a threat. It may or may not happen. But a disaster is when it actually happens and cause damages of some sort. So that's the difference between the two: natural hazards, natural disasters. All right, so let's just break down as simple as possible. Natural hazards are threats. Natural disasters cause damages or even death. All right, so that's the difference between the two. So a hurricane developing or swirling around somewhere out there in the Atlantic Ocean is definitely a threat, especially because we know that one of the natural paths of hurricanes is through the Caribbean, right? However, when it strikes and causes damages like what we're seeing here, the roofs being blown off, then the hurricane becomes a disaster. Now here we have an urban settlement, right? Somewhere along the Caribbean, I'm sure. And it's a nice coastal urban center. Everything looked peaceful and all right. However, in the background, we do have some mountains, and this one in the middle is not any typical mountain. This one is actually an active volcano. Now, an active volcano by itself is a natural hazard, but it does not become a disaster as yet. No, not yet. Notice this clock tower? Take notice of it, all right? Now remember, an active volcano by itself is a hazard. It's a threat. It may erupt someday, but we are not sure when yet. Now, when it does erupt and causes this amount of damage or even greater, it becomes a natural disaster. All right. Now the volcano you see there in the background is the Sapphire Hills volcano on the island of Montserrat. All right. And as you know what happened in 1996, between 1996 and 1997, all hell broke loose. All right. It erupted and it stayed that way for quite a few years. Now, as you can see, that settlement that you saw amidst the foot of the volcano was the former capital, Plymouth. All right. And as you can see, Plymouth has been obliterated by all the various threats a volcano can throw. So as I said a while ago, a volcano by itself is a natural hazard, especially if it's an active volcano. But when it erupts and causes this amount of damage or even greater, then it also becomes a disaster. It now becomes a disaster because it has created a lot of damage. Here's another scene. Remember that clock tower I was telling you to look at? Well, that's it. Totally covered by all the ash and mud that came from that volcano. Now, right here in Jamaica, we know for a fact that we live within a part of the Caribbean that is prone to earthquakes. That in itself is actually a natural hazard because we live right along a transform plate boundary. You know what transform plate boundaries are quite famous for, right? So we live along a transform plate boundary, right? And that in itself makes it a natural hazard because we know that a transform plate boundary creates earthquakes. However, it's just a natural hazard. But when the plates begin to shift and causes tremendous damage like this or this or even this, it becomes a hazard, or should I say it becomes a natural disaster. The earthquake now becomes a natural disaster. And that is the difference between a natural hazard and a natural disaster. Hazards are threats, but disasters cause damages and even loss of lives. Remember earlier I mentioned three categories of environment: climatic, physical, and biotic. Here we have them. They are also categorized as types of natural hazards. The one that we call physical is the same thing as geographic, right? So climatic hazards are, for example, those that have anything to do with the climate itself. So we have hurricane, droughts, snowstorms, or floods. Well, we don't have snowstorms in the Caribbean, but you get the idea. Geographic hazards are, for example, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, or landslides. Anything that has to do with the land itself is going to, or any form of plate movement is what we call geographic hazards. Biotic hazards are, for example, epidemics, like for example, a virus outbreak, plant diseases, forest fires, pests. All right, for example, locust, and we put locust there because I remembered back in 1988, after Hurricane Gilbert, the Caribbean, especially Jamaica, was actually invaded by swarms of locusts. Where did they come from? That's still a mystery. So these are the different types of hazards. They are just simply threats. They're there within the environment, but for the time being, they are threats. It's when they actually occur, then they become disasters. Caribbean countries are vulnerable to natural hazards because most Caribbean countries are close to the various plate margins. They are also within the paths of the hurricane or tropical storms naturally. Most people live close to the sea, and living close to the sea makes you prone um, to being affected by storm surges during hurricanes or even a tsunami uh, generated by an earthquake. Many people live on steep slopes, especially here in the Caribbean. A lot of people build their houses on steep slopes. And natural environments have been altered, to create roads, or they cut down the forest, or they undermine the mountain slopes, or they remove the mangroves. And because of these alterations, you may have land collapsing, you have coastal erosion and flooding taking place, and even erosion of the mountain slopes taking place too. So hurricanes, volcanoes, and earthquakes are the three common natural disasters that occur in the Caribbean. Now, as you can see, you have the countries that are threatened, the countries that are not threatened. All right. Now, the countries that are affected by hurricanes, for the most part, are most Caribbean countries, except for Guyana and Suriname. We can throw French Guiana in there as well. They are not affected by hurricanes. Um, Volcanic eruptions only affect the countries in the Eastern Caribbean, but they don't affect Jamaica. Jamaica may have a couple of volcanic mountains, but they are not active. Trinidad is not affected by volcanic eruptions. Neither is Guyana, Suriname, Belize, or the Bahamas. But all the other islands of the Eastern Caribbean are volcanic in origin, and a lot of them still have active volcanoes. Most Caribbean countries are located along the plate margins that would also generate earthquakes, with the exception of Guyana, Suriname, and the Bahamas. So the reason why disasters are increasing in the Caribbean is because you have more developments taking place. So you have more roads, more buildings, and so on, especially industrial complexes. So you know that when certain natural disasters occur, they can generate big losses or great damage. People tend to build in hazardous places like on floodplains or along the shorelines or even on steep slopes. And also because of the risk of extreme events such as hurricane that is generated by climate change. Now, most Caribbean governments carry out some form of disaster management, and so we have like scientific techniques used in monitoring hurricanes as well as volcanoes. We also have modern construction techniques being employed and modern transportation and communication, which allows for help or well needed help to go in the affected areas. There is also a better understanding of how we can reduce hazardous threats. So people are becoming more and more educated now on natural hazards or natural disasters and how to mitigate them. So, with all that just said a while ago, now you know what are natural hazards and natural disasters and all the little intricacies that come with them. Now we're going to look at the three main types of natural disasters that affect the Caribbean, and we're going to look at them in depth right now. So the first one we're looking at is hurricanes. All right, so we're looking at hurricanes first.
Violent winds, driving rain, killer waves. These are the hallmarks of a hurricane. Also called cyclones or typhoons, hurricanes are giant storms prowling the world's tropical seas. An average hurricane releases as much energy in a day as the explosion of 500,000 small atomic bombs. Hurricanes form in the summer and fall when the sun heats vast stretches of tropical ocean to over 82 degrees. Warm, moist air rises over these hot spots, creating thunderstorms. Upper-level winds and surface winds then come together, forming a circular pattern of clouds known as a tropical depression. When the winds exceed 39 miles per hour, a tropical storm has developed. When the winds reach 74 miles per hour, a hurricane is officially born. Inside the storm, bands of rain up to 300 miles long meet in the eye wall, the most violent section. Here, winds of up to 200 miles per hour spiral upward. Within the center of the hurricane, downdrafts of dry air create a strangely calm area called the eye. Fully formed, a hurricane may stretch over 500 miles in diameter. Most dangerous is the storm surge, a wall of water that sweeps across the coastline where a hurricane makes landfall. About 45,000 people were killed by hurricanes in the 20th century.
Okay, so you just saw the video about hurricane, and it tells you basically everything you need to know about a hurricane, especially the fact that hurricanes actually become into being at 75 miles per hour, all right, and greater. Any less is called a tropical storm. However, one thing it didn't mention is the fact that you have different categories of hurricanes, which is that you have 5 categories of hurricanes, and category 5 being the strongest. So 75 miles per hour wind is at category 1. Good, but it goes even much greater than that, over 100 miles per hour, almost 200 miles per hour, you go up to category 5. So what I'm trying to point out here is that the most destructive threat or element of the hurricane is its wind. And hurricanes create a lot of wind damage. And that's the first threat of the hurricane we're going to look at, the wind damage. Winds can destroy crops and may put a halt to an industry, whether that is banana, sugarcane, or citrus, whatever crop. It will just put a stop to that industry for quite a while because of damages sustained by the trees or by the crops as a result of winds. Winds can also damage buildings and blow down trees that can block roads and also damage buildings. Winds can also destroy utility poles. So you may have a disruption in communication and electricity supply. They can also remove the roofs of buildings, as I said earlier. Now I can tell you one thing, as heavy as a coconut is, in a hurricane, a coconut moves like a missile. And that is the main reason why you do not stand at a glass window or glass door or even go outside during the hurricane, because hurricanes can actually take debris from roofs, like zinc sheets for example, and a lot of times in the Caribbean people have been decapitated because they have ventured outside during a hurricane. Coconuts are very, very powerful missiles in a hurricane, deadly missiles, and they end up flying around the place. They can also create much damage and also kill people, which has happened in the past. Now, strong winds can also blow down weak or poorly constructed walls. So here we have a scene. This was in Grenada after the passage of a major hurricane. This is just a section, as you can see. Buildings are damaged. Trees are also blown down. All right, so you see firsthand or secondhand, if you want to put it, the damages created by wind or caused by hurricane winds. Hurricanes can also lead to wave damages. So, during hurricane, waves can reach as high as 8 meters. Now just think of your house, your typical house that you live in. All right, 8 meters is basically higher than is roughly the same height as your ceiling, and waves can reach as high as that or even higher than that. All right, and this may also lead to beach erosion and can also affect local industries like conch or lobster. Oftentimes, boats and other marine faring vessels have gone missing in hurricanes due to strong waves. Storm surges are basically high waves that are generated by hurricanes. All right, they basically follow the hurricanes because what the hurricane does, it acts like a vacuum and suck up the water and causes the water to just rise like a continuous wall. All right, so and it carries it all the way towards the shore and may lead to and can even carry the water even further inland and create flooding in areas a little further away.
Is sea level rise on top of the normal tide level. The rise in sea level is created by low pressure systems, including tropical cyclones, as they near the coast. If storm surge arrives during low tide, coastal impacts may be minor. If, however, storm surge arrives during a high tide, the impacts can be much more severe. The large waves accompanying low pressure systems can make coastal and structural damage much worse. Storm surge, combined with large waves, can reach areas far away from the coast. Strong low pressure systems, especially tropical cyclones, create storm surges by physically pushing the water onshore. The stronger the winds, the higher the storm surge. Large storm surges can push water many kilometers inland, which, combined with wind and pounding waves, can destroy buildings, wash away roads, and
Okay, so this is a section of what was once known as Caribbean Terrace along the coast of Harborview. And these buildings were destroyed. This was actually a residential area, half of a or part of a residential area that was too close to the sea. Got destroyed by storm surges brought in by Hurricane Dean. That was way back in 2006, I think. All right. This is along the coast at Palisados during the passage of Hurricane Dean. As you can see, the storm surge. And if you visit the airport, Norman Manley International Airport these days, well, you know that the road that you're driving on now is pretty clear and looks okay. But during the passage of Hurricane Dean, this was what the storm surge did to the road. It was actually blocked off for miles, and they had to go on for weeks to clear the road. All right, and this was just the start of the clearing, as all of those sand and debris you see there, well, they were actually dumped there by the storm surge during the passage of the hurricane. So hurricanes also cause flooding because it tends to dump a lot of rain, and therefore you're going to have flooding taking place. Sometimes, as you can see earlier, the storm surge can be carried further inland and cause flooding as well. This is the state. This is actually in Louisiana after the passage of Hurricane Katrina. Hurricanes also cause landslides. So because the land becomes saturated due to the heavy rains, eventually the soil becomes loose and are dragged down the steep slopes under the influence of gravity. So then you'll have landslides taking place as a result. All right. So some hurricanes that have passed through the Caribbean recently, for example, Hurricane Ivan. So this hurricane greatly affected Grenada, and you have damage to housing, infrastructure, such as power lines and so on. You also have the economy being affected, where tourism has been affected and the environment itself has been damaged to an extent. And it shows you, it describes all of that to you. All right, so here we have the way how Grenada actually dealt with the crisis at the time. Some people did not prepare themselves for it, despite the many warnings. But Cuba was a bit more. The Cubans were a bit more prepared for Hurricane Ivan, so they did issue lots of warnings, and people evacuated areas that are prone to being damaged by the hurricane, and eventually no lives were lost. Now, there are some things that you have to do in order to ensure that your building, your structure is not damaged, and generally as well. So, buildings must use what are called hurricane straps to fit down roofs. Make sure that the roofs don't get lift off or blown off during the passage of a hurricane. It's important that when you're constructing your houses, you must have steel rods reinforced inside the walls so that the walls are sturdy, they don't blow down. And also reinforced concrete tie beams must be used as well. All right, so this is the hurricane strap I used to hold down the roof so that it doesn't get blown off. As you can see, steel rods are being used within the walls during the construction here. And these are what we call the tie rods or the tie beams, I should say. They are concrete tie beams. All right, they are used that there, especially if you have an upstairs more than one story house. It's important that you install them at every floor. These are the various precautions that need to be taken prior to a hurricane. So make sure that you stock up on supplies, install hurricane shutters for the windows, secure loose objects that may be blown away, especially those that can fall off. Remain inside the house until the storm has passed. You must know where emergency shelters are. Make sure you trim your trees. Make arrangements for your pets or livestock. So you try to make sure you find a way to secure them before the hurricane reaches. And, you know, have a little session with your family members to show them how to operate, you know, things in the house, especially when it comes down to emergency situations after the passing or during the passing of a hurricane. So there are the shutters for the windows. Yep, stock up on all of those. What must be done during the passage of a hurricane? Well, first of all, you're gonna have to ensure that you can listen to your radio. So make sure that you have batteries in your radio and listen to your radio. You must stay inside. Now, after the hurricane has passed, seek medical attention. And listen, when I say after the hurricane has passed, be sure that the hurricane, just listen to your radio to ensure the hurricane has completely passed. Because there are times when the eye itself is passing over your area and you think that the hurricane has passed, because remember, the eye is the calm part of the hurricane. No form of wind or clouds are present, so you may just believe that the hurricane has passed because you see clear skies and there are no winds and so on, when it's just the eye over you. And you go outside, venture outside, you get trapped when the other side of the hurricane is now passing over. So ensure that you listen to your radar to ensure that the hurricane has completely passed. Once that has happened, then if there are any injuries, go and seek emergency attention or medical attention. Clean up the debris. Make sure you check to see if there are any potential secondary hazards, like for example, gashing of your electrical cords, all right, or anything like that that can cause damage or fire. And if possible, assist in the clearance of your community roads and avoid sightseeing, because sometimes you may go sightseeing and end up putting yourself in danger. So if you want to look to see whose mango tree blow down or coconut tree blow down, or who's, that neighbor you don't like, if them roof gone, so you can laugh after them, no bother with it. Just don't go sightseeing. Just look after your place first before you go out anywhere. Governments tend to carry out preparation for a hurricane in the following ways. They will do what is called a risk assessment. They will also carry out floodplain management. They may also reduce the vulnerability of structures and infrastructure. So they'll carry out measures to strengthen them and to improve them so that they are not damaged during hurricanes. And finally, they will carry out a land use zoning so they know where are the safe areas. Alright, so the next one that we're looking at now are volcanoes. We're looking at the volcanic activity or the impact of volcanic activity in the Caribbean. Now, to understand how volcanoes can become natural disasters, we have to look at the fact that the volcanoes have two types of lava. You have basic and acidic lava, also known as viscous lava. Basic is also known as basaltic lava. So basic lava is basically um, it has low silica, low amounts of silica, so it moves fluid, it moves like water, moves very rapid, all right, and it spreads out in thin sheets. But the acidic or viscous lava, it contains lots of silica content. It has a high silica content, so it is very thick and moves extremely slowly. You can compare it to ketchup, for example. Very thick, moves very slowly. So the first threat of the volcano are what we call lava flows. This is the first threat of the volcano, lava flows. And this is basically the flowing or the movement of lava along the surface. And whatever is in its way, it will destroy. Here we have a photograph of acidic lava. As you can see, it's very thick and it's building up. And it moves very slowly because had it been basic lava, these men would not be walking away, I'm sure. And they would, even if they were running, they wouldn't stand a chance just the same. And that is, so this one now is what we call the basic lava. It doesn't have a lot of silica, so it is very thin and it moves freely and it spreads out in thin sheets. All right, so here we have basic lava going along its merry way down the slope of a volcano. Most likely this is Mount Kilauea in Hawaii. As you can see, it flows very fluid like a river. Here's another instance of basic lava bubbling up in a pool. Yep, anybody wants to jump in for a swim or for a nice hot bath? This is the acidic or viscous lava, very slow in its movement, very thick, and it doesn't move fast at all, but it continues to move. And that's the important thing about it. It will continue to move. Here we have another instance of it again. And that car right there, as you notice, I'm sure it has seen better days. The pyroclastic flow is another threat of the volcano. And this is where all the materials, including gas, lava, rocks, ash, all of those come together and just roll down the side of a mountain at extremely high speeds and having great temperatures. And this is the most destructive element of a volcano. All right, the pyroclastic flow. So here's a photograph of a pyroclastic flow. And here we have pyroclastic flow moving down slope a mountain. It's like the volcano just vomiting up everything within its belly and it's just rolling down the slope. This was slowed down just to have you have a better look at what it is, but if it was to be going at its natural speed, it will be rushing down the slope extremely fast right now. I mean, I don't think there's a car that can drive faster than how fast a pyroclastic flow can flow at this point. It moves extremely fast. So ash falls is another threat of the volcano because here we have ash being ejected by an erupting volcano and it falls back to the surface. Now, it can cause damage to utility lines. It can fall on people or animal and burn them because the ash is not cool. The ash is actually very hot. So it can cause um, plants or animals or even people upon which it falls, causing them to get burnt. It can cause them to get, it can be very suffocating too because it uses up all the oxygen, and so you can find yourself suffocating as a result. Um, it can cause damage to it, the weight of the ash can cause roofs to cave in, and people within the structure can easily die or perish as a result. All right. Um, it can also cause loss to animals also. So ashfall, as simple as it look, is very dangerous. Another very dangerous aspect of the volcano. It's another threat of the volcano. Another thing with ash falls too is that they can cause engine failure in airplanes. If a plane flies too close to an ashfall or through an ashfall, it can actually cause engine failure, and the plane may also erupt, or the engine may also, should I say, not erupt, but explode as well due to the buildup of friction in the engine caused by the particles of ash as well. So here we have a volcano erupting, and if you look carefully, you can see the ash being blown away and is now falling back to the surface. All right, and as I can tell you, a pilot, it would be a very crazy pilot to fly through that. Pilot, that's the reason why whenever volcanoes do erupt, any flights going in that general direction are either diverted or delayed or cancelled, because you wouldn't want to take a risk of flying too close or even through a volcanic ashfall. So as was said earlier, these are the reasons why ashfalls are very dangerous. This is a building whose roof has collapsed. As you can see, it also destroyed the crops or the plants there. Lots of ash can also bury a building or bury structures. And yes, they can cause death to animals as well. You can see the animal here buried beneath the ash. Damage to crops, and can also result in engine failure of an airplane that has flown either too close or through an ashfall. Volcanoes can also result in mud flows because at times you have either the ice, if it's an ice capped mountain or volcano, it will melt, and you have saturated mud flowing very quickly down slope, and any village or settlement at the foot of that slope in its path of the mud flow can be totally obliterated. Um, if it's a case where you have heavy rains falling, all that unconsolidated ash will rush down the slope as well and will create a lot of damage. Just the same thing happened in Montserrat, when the Soufriere Hills volcano erupted, and you also have it happening in South America, Colombia to be precise, where the town of Armero was totally obliterated by a mud flow. Now, a volcanic mud flow is what you call a lahar, Lahar, lahar. So here we have a photograph showing the destruction of the town of Plymouth, or the capital of Plymouth. And a lot of that damage was caused by the pyroclastic flow, no doubt. But additional damage was also done by the ensuing lahar that was created shortly after. All right, so that was Mount Ruapehu Lahar that you saw a while ago. Mount Ruapehu Lahar. So these are the methods or techniques employed in order to predict volcanic eruptions, as you can see here. And now this brings us to earthquakes, our final hazard that we are quite commonly affected by here in the Caribbean. Now, the main threats of earthquakes are the tremors, the ground fissures or fractures or cracks in the ground, liquefaction, as well as landslides. So the shaking or the vibration itself can be a big threat, can cause damage to buildings or infrastructure, and may lead to loss of lives. Very scary, I'm sure. Ground fissures opening up, and I'm sure you heard the story for those of you who are familiar with Jamaican history or Caribbean history during the 1692 earthquake. Um, a man was actually swallowed up by the earth, the ground opened up and he fell down in it and it spat him out back. And according to what he had said, he had actually seen the gates of hell and lived to tell about it. I can't recall his name exactly. I know it starts with the letter G, but I can't recall his name right now. He lived many years after, but it was a famous part of the Port Royal earthquake story, where he actually fell in a fissure that opened up, and after after some time he was spat out by the ground. The ground pushed him out, forced him out again. So here we're going to have liquefaction being demonstrated to you. As you see, that's how liquefaction takes place. Now this is one good example of liquefaction occurring during an earthquake in the Caribbean. This is the Giddy House in Port Royal. Well, it's actually the artillery house where they keep all the gunpowder and all the ammunition and so on. But during the Port Royal earthquake, it actually sank. Part of it sank beneath the surface. And when one walks into here, into this structure, they get a feeling of giddiness, and that's why it's called the Giddy House. Earthquakes can also generate landslides, as you can see demonstrated here. Earthquakes can also lead to flooding, where you may have dams bursting, so you have flooding taking place, or you may have tsunamis going very far inland and cause flooding as well. Gas pipelines may also burst, causing fires to occur. And this happened in 1906 in San Francisco and also in 1923 in Tokyo, and even in the early 2000s in Tokyo as well. Tsunamis also occur as a result of earthquakes, and these are vast or large waves that are generated by seismic activity. This is flooding taking place in Japan due to a tsunami going very far inland. This is also in Japan, where we had fires breaking out as a result of the earthquake causing the gas pipelines to burst. And here we have a tsunami, a very powerful and large wave sweeping in, destroying coastal areas. Some notable earthquakes in the Caribbean, can't forget about them though. 1692 earthquake in Port Royal, more than 3,000 people were killed. We also had a 1907 earthquake in Kingston, Jamaica. In 1993 we also had an earthquake in Kingston, and since of recent we've been having quite a few earthquakes, not very noteworthy but quite memorable just the same. Here we have a section of Kingston, and this was during the Kingston earthquake. We've also had tsunamis in the Caribbean over the years. As you can see, Dominican Republic 1946. One was generated all the way by the Lisbon earthquake in Portugal in 1755, but didn't really did anything to write home about. And one in 1867 in the Virgin Islands, and that killed around 20 persons. So what can we do to mitigate the effects of the earthquake? Well, during an earthquake, stay calm, try to protect your head most of all, rather broken arms than a broken skull. Stand in a strong doorway or under a strong desk or table. Stay away from buildings or trees or any other falling objects if you're outside. And if you're driving, park somewhere safe and away from any other falling objects. What must you do after an earthquake has occurred? Well, check if there are any fires, any outbreak of fires in the building. Collect water for later use because I'm sure the water supply would be disrupted. Be prepared for aftershocks. Listen to the radio for emergency bulletins. Do not go sightseeing in the streets.
Now class, a strong earthquake in 1766 was the most severe earthquake that we know about to affect Trinidad, destroying our first capital city, San Jose, now called St. Joseph. Good.
During an earthquake, it can be very frightening. But remember, we must not panic. Stay indoors until the shaking stops. If you're outdoors, find a clear spot away from buildings, trees, and power lines. Stay away from glass windows or anything that can fall. If the classroom is crowded, do not rush for the door, as everybody will be doing that. If this info seems much, just remember to drop, cover, hold. Drop down on the floor. Take cover under a desk, table, or sturdy furniture. Hold your position and hold on to whatever you're using for cover until the ground stops shaking. Shaking.
Kieran,
Yes, sir.
is everything okay?
I was wondering what can you do to prepare for an earthquake?
Great question. I'm glad that you asked. The secret is to drop, cover, and hold. Class, drop, cover, and hold. Good.
A message from the ODPM, a division of the Ministry of National Security.
All right, wise words there from the ODPM. Not to mix it up with ODPEM. ODPM, that's in Trinidad and Tobago. ODPEM is in Jamaica. So, what are some measures that we need to take in order to prevent or reduce the effects of earthquakes on buildings? Well, buildings need to be strengthened and compacted. Reclaimed land. Use steel beams or steel rods, all right, to make sure buildings are firm. Attach buildings to its foundation with anchor bolts and strap water heaters to the wall. All right, so they must be firmly, or not only just water heaters, but any other object that can freely fall. You need to strap them close to the wall or along the wall. So measures that must be taken to prevent the effects of natural hazards or disasters. Well, first of all, we must try to promote afforestation, plant back the trees that have been deforested. We should protect our mangrove areas and try not to remove them, because if you do so, the coastline will be affected by storm surges and tsunamis, and buildings near beaches should be prohibited. So you should not allow, governments should prevent the building of beaches, or should I say buildings along beaches. So let's look at some national disaster response agencies in the Caribbean. The first one we're looking at is NEMO, which is National Emergency Management Organization, and this is in St. Lucia. And this is their aim. And these are some of the activities that it carries out. All right. Next one is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or CDEMA, and the headquarters for this one is in Barbados. They were set up in 1991, and that's their aim right there, to manage disasters by increasing preparedness. And these are the activities that it's mandated to carry out. But why not? I would love for you to hear from them yourselves.
CDEMA is a regional intergovernmental organization for disaster management in the Caribbean community. The agency was established in 1991 as CDERA, with primary responsibility for the coordination of emergency response and relief efforts to participating states that require such assistance. It transitioned to CDEMA in 2009 with a broader mandate to promote an integrated and proactive approach to comprehensive disaster management, including mobilizing and coordinating emergency response and relief to its 18 participating member states when impacted by disasters. CDEMA's mandate includes mitigating or eliminating as far as practicable the immediate consequences of disasters in participating states, immediate and coordinated response to disasters in participating states, mobilizing and coordinating disaster relief from governmental and non-governmental organizations for affected participating states, to promote the establishment, enhancement, and maintenance of disaster response capabilities and disaster loss reduction and development of a culture of safety. CDEMA's philosophy is changing lives through comprehensive disaster management. CDEMA's vision statement is a regional center for disaster risk management excellence and the preferred partner for a safe Caribbean. CDEMA's mission statement is to empower participating states, influence, collaborate, and partner with other organizations to build disaster resilience in the Caribbean. And its master strategy states that CDEMA will cultivate strategic partnerships which build national and regional capacity for CDM. CDEMA's governance mechanism supports the principles of comprehensive disaster management within the context of broad stakeholder participation, whilst ensuring that the roles and responsibilities of the various organs are clearly defined for enhanced accountability and transparency in the areas of decision-making. CDEMA is governed through the Council, which consists of ministers responsible for disaster management in participating states, the Technical Advisory Committee, which consists primarily of the National Disaster Coordinators or Directors of the CDEMA participating states, and the Coordinating Unit, which actions the decisions of the CDEMA Council and executes the daily responsibilities of CDEMA. CDEMA remains the preferred partner for the coordination of disaster management among CARICOM states and will continue to work with all stakeholders to mainstream comprehensive disaster management for a more resilient and sustainable Caribbean.
Last and final, we're looking at the ODPEM, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, and this one is the Jamaican agency, Remember I told you not to mix up ODPM, which is in Trinidad, with the ODPEM, which is in Jamaica. Alright, there's its aim. And these are the activities that it has carried out over the years and is still doing. So you're not really required to know all of these information if you're doing the exam, but it's very good to know that you have a general idea of all the operations these organizations in the Caribbean carry out, especially SEDEMA and ODPEM, and we can also fit NEMO in that mix as well. So let me just give you a word of advice from the ODPEM.
Yo, this is we're committed to reducing the impact of disasters occurring in Jamaica. We're ever ready to assist you before, during, and after a disaster. But everybody have a role to play, so make we work together and follow the plan. Whether rich or poor or where you come from, hurricanes affect everyone, so be prepared. Prevention is better than cure. Be prepared. Listen to ADPEM. A message from the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management.
Alright, so right there they actually summed up in a nutshell basically how they operate and giving poignant words of advice, to the public. So with that said, so there you have it, ADPEM summing up its aims and its operation all in a nutshell. But the most important thing is it gives some important advice to all concerned. Now, I do hope you enjoyed today's presentation. As you can see, we've come to the end of our lesson. And I do hope that you found this video quite interesting and quite enlightening. Now, remember to share this video, leave a comment here and there, like it, as well as to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching my video, and of course continue to love geography all thy might and to work hard at it. Have yourselves a blessed day. Take care, everyone.